My name is Michael Guyette, publisher of the Lead Lag Report. Joining me for the hour is Mike Simonsen. I named the space play on the tweet I put out just yesterday. It went a little bit viral, but we're going to be doing a lot more than talk about Airbnb. But Mike, introduce yourself to the audience. Who are you? What's your background? How'd you get involved, interested in the data analytics side of housing, and what are you doing currently?
Sure. So my name is Mike Simonsen. I am the founder, president of a company called Altos Research. And we track the housing market. We track every week. We track every home for sale in the country, all the pricing, all the supply and demand, all the changes in that data. And then we publish out the analytics for, people who care about such things. So, we have tens of thousands of real estate agents use our data every day. We have big financial firms, all the players in the industry, people, investors and lenders and home builders, anybody who has exposure to the U.S. real estate market. And so we track everything every week. Most housing data is lagging by several months by the time it gets to you. And so, it's why the headlines are so often wrong, because the market has changed before the data gets through that. And so we track everything every week and track it by Friday and publish it out on Monday morning. We've been doing this company for 17 years. I'm a longtime Silicon Valley data guy, but 17 years ago, we left our jobs and started Altos Research.
How fragmented are those data points that you put together? Recognizing the lag part of it, I got to assume there's a lot of piping that goes into the types of data you're putting out.
Yeah. So the way housing data traditionally works is houses on the market now. It gets an offer in September. That deal closes in October or maybe November. And then you typically start hearing about it in November or December, where the prices changed or where they closed. But if you look, you could see right now where that house is priced, where it's going to close, how much under or overbidding is going on. You can see all of that stuff in the data right now. And so, but traditional, literally it's August and you're going to be hearing about these sales in November. And if you're using something like the Case-Shiller Index, that's November, December, January that you're starting to hear about the stuff that we can see right now in the data. And so what we do is, like I said, we check every home for sale in the country every week. And so our data goes down to zip code level, and inside the zip codes, it's condos behave differently from single family homes and high end. So we do 4 price range segments in every zip code in the country. The high end of the market may be behaving differently from the low end. And then we bubble up all that analytics. So it gives us a really, any zip code in the country can tell you exactly what's happening right now, or metro or national or, regional or state, all that view.
Since you mentioned the differential between the high end and the low ends, it's been, I think, correctly noted that higher mortgage rates only matter for those that can't afford using cash. Right? And if you have cash to pay for a house, then you're probably more on the high end side of things. How have mortgage rates impacted the two different sides of pricing when it comes to housing?
So I'm not sure that assumption is true, that cash buyers only buy expensive homes. We have seen in the last year, though, obviously, as mortgage rates have gone up, affordability has decreased, and that's slowed purchase demand across all price points. If you look at the places where homes move fastest, where the demand is greatest, it's pretty obvious where the sweet spot for Americans is right about $400,000. And those are the homes that people want to buy. And those are the ones that are still moving fastest. And so it's a little at the ultra high end. It's there's a little more volatility in prices. So it can be hard to know, in the multi-million-dollar homes are those prices down? It really, depends on the property and the local market and things like that across the country. So, but you can see it picking up any area that typical home right now takes about 45 days to sell. That is ticking up, but it always ticks up at the second half of the year. It's ticking longer than during the pandemic craziness, when it was down 14 or 21 days, something like that, because people were buying homes immediately as soon as they hit the market. And so that's slowed across all price points.
And what's sort of the historical range of those days to sell? Where are we relative to other cycles?
Yeah. So we are still lower than normal, and we're faster to sell than normal. Normal, call it last decade. It'd be a couple of months, 60 days, and we're at 45 kind of thing right now. And that's really a function of the fact that we have super tight inventory. So very little selection. We have had all year more buyers than sellers. So we've had inventory falling all year. And, that was a super surprise based on where we started the year, like buyers adjusted to the mortgage rates. And so they were buying more. And so that things like inventory fell, days on market stayed lower. All of those things were way lower than we expected, coming in the beginning of the year based on how cold the fourth quarter was last year.
So I'm trying to think of this in terms of, almost like an equity type of framework. So in equities, you have small caps, mid caps, large caps. In housing, you're going to low end, the sweet spot you mentioned, 400K, and then high end. On that inventory dynamic, where is it worst in terms of, that kind of small, mid, large framework?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I have a specific answer. Where is inventory, like by price range? But you can see it by geography. So the Western U.S. markets were the biggest boom markets during the pandemic. Austin and Boise and Salt Lake and Phoenix. And, those markets were the absolute boom markets during the pandemic. And they were the fastest to slow last year. And so inventory built. And, this was a combination of inbound migration that then slowed when rates went and, post pandemic return to the office. And so suddenly, like those kind of things, all those pandemic forces slowed way down last year. And so you could see things like days on market climbing and inventory climbing and things like percentage of homes that have to take a price cut climbed way up last year from record few to like high levels. And so you could see that in places like Austin and Phoenix. And those markets recovered substantially this spring. And you can see like right now, in the last few weeks, his mortgage rates have gone from upper sixes to in the, 7.25 kind of thing. You can see the slowdown. You can really see it in like Austin ticking back up again. And so you can see that in inventory, to your question on inventory, is like, where are the homes for sale? Austin is like one of the very few places where there are more homes for sale now than there were in 2019 at this time. Almost everywhere else in the country, there's fewer homes for sale. And places like in the Midwest and Northeast, there's dramatically fewer homes for sale than normal. It's still at pandemic lows, like never came off the record lows at the bottom of the pandemic in places like, Connecticut and, the Midwest and the Northeast, where there was a lot more inventory that rose in the West. And last year, Boise led the curve. This year, it's really Austin that is slowing the fastest, where inventory is built the most, and Austin leads with the most price reductions right now in any market around.
So it's actually, I think, a good transition to why I named the space the way I named it, and the tweet that I put out, which was basically a response to Amy Nixon's post, who I had on one of these spaces before. So I shared an analysis at this point that she made about, there's 3,300 homes for sale in Austin, and there's 12,000 Airbnbs in Austin. So her argument, which I think has some validity, is it's not so much of a housing inventory issue as much as it is a ownership and use of home issue because of the Airbnb dynamic. I'm curious just to hear your thoughts on how the broader trend toward buying up properties to rent them out through Airbnb type of distribution platforms, how has that maybe permanently impacted the state of housing?
So I'm sort of sympathetic to the hypothesis that Airbnb is at fault, but Airbnb is pretty minor. I would scope it bigger than that. Here's what we have. For the last decade or more, every year we have fewer homes on the market. We have fewer and fewer homes on the market. And we've had dramatically low interest rates. It's been a tremendous decade to own real estate. And so we own it. And so we own more. And every year we own more. And so that may be I am buying my first house because it's a good time to do it. Or maybe I'm owning Airbnbs, or maybe I'm owning investment properties in general. And really it's investment properties in general. So, we've taken 10 million or so homes out of the resale cycle and made them investment properties. And a lot of times it's like, we either want to blame Airbnb or we want to blame BlackRock or we want to blame, one of these big nefarious corporations. But in reality, we have 94% of investment properties are owned by individuals who own like 1, 2, 3 doors. Yeah, it's like 94%. And they do so because, like I said, it's been a really good decade for them to do so. All of our laws, all of our policy, all of our fiscal and monetary, all of our tax policy is all designed to favor owning your house, like to financially protect the home owner. And so we own. And so we have therefore had fewer and fewer homes for sale. Airbnb is, in my view, is a tiny element of that. I think you could look at Austin. By the way, I would caution to use Austin as oh, look, there's some wacky stat in Austin. Therefore, the housing market is going to crash. It's like, hey, let me cherry pick the slowest market in the country right now and then draw big conclusions of it. I think it's bad logic, but I would say that in this country, we are all designed to favor the owner, all of the laws. And so we own. And so Airbnb is because money's been so cheap and then you can, it's an easy way to add revenue to that home. It's been it's a factor in why we own more homes now. Fewer people own more homes, but it's hard for me to draw that as the cause.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think it's more just a function of narrative. I mean, to the extent that it's been just like every industry, I'd argue, is becoming more and more of an oligopoly, right? It's Pareto principle on steroids. And if that dynamic continues in housing because of the re-leveraging aspect of housing, then it's true. You end up having a renter nation regardless.
Well, I mean, yes, no. We have empowered, our homeowners are in really strong financial shape. American homeowners are in really strong financial shape. So, what we've done is change the affordability for younger people. And we have some real challenges there. But most of the country is we made all the things really good for that class of people. And so they're in really good shape.
All right. So let's talk about kind of the current data that you're seeing that you're putting across that's, not as lagged, especially now that, to your point, mortgage rates are picking back up because yields are rising and, pretty aggressively on the 30-year side. Where are we on things? I mean, are we in a dynamic where housing prices, keep on rising broadly, but maybe after inflation, it's not so much of an inflation hedge going forward, or do we see some outright declines and I'm sure nuances within that? So
we see the year 2023 has been surprisingly strong for home prices. A year ago could see a little more than a year ago, 16 months ago, you could see that home prices were going to be flat to down by mid 2023. That's where they came through. But this year, because we've had more buyers and sellers, they put a floor on pricing. And so they were buying things and eating up inventory. So inventory fell during the year. So right now there are 496,000 single family homes on the market around the country. That's the first week since New Year's, the highest inventory, the first time this week since New Year's, we have more inventory than we started the year with. So inventory has been falling all year long. It's finally inching back up. And so we have, 50% fewer homes on the market than we did in 2019. We have 10% fewer homes than we did on the market last year at this time. And so those things, on the supply side of the supply demand equation, bode well for home prices. Home prices took a big leg down in September and October last year. So if you remember, there was a spike in mortgage rates at that point. They went from close to 6, all of a sudden 6.5 and 7.5 in a few weeks. And that really slowed things down. So last year, inventory of homes climbed September and October, which was super unusual, because they'd already crested for the year. Inventory had already crested for the year. So demand stopped cold. Inventory rose in the fourth quarter and prices, especially sales prices, ticked down in the fourth quarter. So by this year, in September and October, the year-over-year comparison is going to get easier. So we will likely home prices will end up this year by a few percent. And these are not inflation adjusted numbers. We track everything. We go, these are the numbers, and you can, do adjustments after that. But so they'll likely end this year up a few percent because there's a floor on home prices now and have been inching up all year. And the year-over-year comparisons get super easy by the end of the year. So then next year we can see that the factors to pay attention to is if rates go up from here, go to 8%, consumers are really responsive to that. And they'll back off. Inventory will climb. We'll have fewer transactions. And likely then you could see home prices will have to adjust down. Not a crash, and see crash anywhere in the data. But then on the other hand, if rates inch back down, like below 7 to closer to 6 in that range, then you'll see inventory fall, you'll see more transactions happen, and you'll see price pressure heading up. So, there is no signal anywhere in the data of a big surge in home prices. There is no signal anywhere in the data of a crash in home prices, certainly not like it looked last year at this time or, last year in May, where you could see price cuts like flowing in, the more price cuts each week, really dramatically increasing rate. That's not happening right now. Price cuts are inching up right now with mortgage rates, meaning there's slightly fewer buyers, so there's slightly fewer offers, so that if your house is on the market, you got slightly more of them are cutting their price to spur demand. So you can see it slow in just a little bit from the surprisingly strong first half of the year. But that's what the scenario plays out for prices next year.
What would it take for inventory to not inch up, but just sort of really accelerate? I mean, is it just a function of you need to have a recession, you need to have increased unemployment, or is there some other external factor that needs to kick in?
So there is, we would call it the Altos rule of inventory. So the main thing about inventory, and it's a common misconception that, as soon as rates fall again, we'll get more inventory. The data shows it's actually the opposite is true. So it's when rates rise, inventory rises. When rates fall, inventory falls. And it's really a function of holding costs. So, when rates are higher, costs more to hold my real estate. I sell some of it. When I buy the next one, I don't keep the first one. I have to resell the first one to finance the next one. There's all those kind of reasons. And conversely, when rates fall, that spurs demand, but not that much supply. So inventory falls. So the first thing is more inventory requires higher rates, higher for longer. To get back to normally this time of year, you could expect 1 million homes, single family homes on the market in August. And there's under 500,000 right now. In 2015, there was like 1.2 million. So, there's dramatically fewer homes. But it took us a decade to get down to these levels, a decade of really low rate. So you can imagine multiple years of higher rates getting us back, inching back up higher, closer to the old normal level of inventory. So that's one, rate direction. If rates go up, inventory will go up. There are other places where you might see inventory come from. You might see job loss recession and you lose your job and then you can't make your mortgage, right? So then you have to put the house on the market. The thing to keep in mind with job loss recession is that it really takes a year at the earliest for the inventory to come after the job losses are here, right? So we're still at record employment right now. So let's say recession hits hard in the fourth quarter and start losing jobs in 2024. It's really 2025 inventory or later that would come right after the hard job loss recession. So that's another, year and a half away, assuming we get the job loss recession first. You could imagine in a different rate environment and you get a combination of things where like investors or like the Airbnb bus, like Amy's, like Airbnb bus, whatever her term is. You can imagine that hypothesis of these people are going to be selling their homes when it no longer pencils. They're no longer making revenue. So I think the key to remember there is there's a lot of people with those fears about the housing market. The key to remember right now is there is no signal anywhere in the data of any of those folks selling properties. Like, so the hypothesis is that this is where inventory could come from, but it ain't here yet. And that's also why we track the inventory every week, right? Like, we can know exactly when they start selling their homes, but none of them are. And so at some point, maybe that changes. It's, on the other hand, like, think about investors this year. This time last year, we were like wondering, okay, market slows. Do investors, single family home investors, big and small, right? Most of the investors are individuals. They're like, 94% real estate investors are individuals, but big money and small money. We were saying last year at this time, like, okay, do investors panic now and sell and exacerbate the downturn? Or do they sit there and they say, like, as now I see opportunity for the first time in years, I don't have competition and I'm going to buy when all of a sudden my cap rate looks good, home prices tick down enough, my cap rate looks good, I'm going to buy. So we didn't know what was going to happen last year. Like, were investors going to help put a floor on pricing, or were they going to exacerbate the downturn? And it turned out this year they put a floor on pricing. Like, there's enough cash sitting on the sidelines that, like, in Phoenix, prices tick down, and there's enough people who want to be investors in Phoenix are like, I'll take that. And they started buying homes really quickly. So, home prices adjusted down a little bit. Investors stopped having to compete as hard, the ones who had cash. And so they went and bought homes. And so that put a floor on prices very quickly this year. And so, the other side of the hypothesis is that, like, we have that, the Airbnb bust hypothesis, which says, like, oh, these people are screwed. They're over leveraged. There's too many of them. And as soon as the economy turns, they're going to have to sell. What the other side is that, like, as soon as the economy turns, like, finally there's going to be some selection for buyers who've been competing and priced out and messed up and for years, right? So at least that's how it played out this year, because that, like, if you had a really people have had bearish calls on housing for multiple years, right? It looks crazy. The prices went up in the pandemic. If you look at just the price curve, it sure is easy to look at that and go, there has to be a regression to mean. Prices have to adjust. Like, it's really, at first glance, it's like, the air quotes, it has to happen, is really easy conclusion to get to. And so then we were watching, like, okay, well, when's it coming? And so, that's why this year played out with such a surprise, right? Because, home buyers, they bought more homes than were for sale.
I wonder how much of that is just because of animal spirits and a spillover from the equity market, right? So there is an argument I've heard, which I myself also think has some merit, that part of the reason it's been surprising there's been a reacceleration in housing is because there's been a reacceleration in, people's investment portfolios, at least in terms of their large cap allocations.
Yeah, it sure does seem like they are tightly correlated. Like, I don't know. I'm not studying money flows or, like, we track the housing market, right? And so, we track the housing market through the, downturn, and we could see that the Altos number turned in the great financial crisis, the same week as the S&P 500 bottomed in whatever it was, 2010. Like, it was really precise. And so you can see that, like, I could imagine that, people bought houses this year because everybody's employed and the companies, like, their salaries are going up, and oh, by the way, I'm, a 36-year-old millennial, and I've been unable to buy in the last couple of years because there's so much competition, and now I can buy. Like, it makes a lot of sense,
Just to reset the room for the remaining minutes here, everybody please make sure you follow Mike Simonsen here on X. And if you want to come up and ask questions, click that bottom left mic request button. And as always, this will be in podcast under Lead Lag Live on all of your favorite platforms, Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Let's talk about home builders. Home builders, at least the stocks, have done particularly well this year, completely diverged from lumber to my chagrin. I often talk about lumber because of the link to housing starts and construction. How have home builders been responding this year? And are you noticing kind of any interesting changes that could be happening industry-wide for next year?
Yeah. So, home builders are the biggest surprise. It's a surprise for the year. Like, we're coming to the year going, oh, man, like, coming to the beginning of the year, it was like, the fourth quarter was so cold. Inventory rose in October, late October last year, and that looked like it would continue. And then we expected, a recession would hit sometime this year. And so like I was expecting that we'd have growing available inventory of resale homes all year long. But because that didn't happen, the opposite happened. And inventory fell of resale homes. The home builders were the dramatic direct benefit of that demand. And, it's a weird thing to say. People have a hard time wrapping their head around it, but we had more buyers than sellers for homes all year long, floor on pricing. And home builders had a nice little pile of inventory. Post-pandemic supply chain inventory became available, and they sold a bunch of houses. And it was a really great opportunity for them. The other thing that home builders had this year was a better ability to control the interest rates that their buyers were paying. And so they had an affordability advantage over resale this year. And so buyers took that as well, right? Like, if a home builder buys down my mortgage rate, and so now I'm paying 5% this year, I'm still paying 5%. Like that's a pretty good deal for people. And so that I think was another factor that really helped the builders succeed this year. So then next year, we don't do equities analysis. I've proven over and over that I do not trade equities, but I do know that the dynamics for inventory are, there's no signal anywhere in the data that we have a flood of inventory coming, like none. So, you can imagine another year of tight inventory. If rates stay in the sevens, you could imagine it inching up a little bit from here. But, there's only 490,000 single family homes on the market right now. And so next year, like you could imagine that it climbs, maybe it's 500,000 or something like that. Maybe if recession hits, you get more, existing inventory climbs a little bit more. And that's sort of the forecast I was expecting for this year, is that maybe we'd hit 700,000 homes on the market. And of course, it went the other direction. So then what does that mean for the home builders? Well, so that means inventory remains dramatically tight for the existing single family homes. And it means that we can see that consumers respond. What's interesting, Michael, is that the consumers are responding less to the absolute rate level and more to the rapid change. So the thing that slows people down is the jump from 6.5 to 7.25, rather than like being at 7.25. Once they're stable, rates are stable at a certain level. Now we go out and buyers are like, okay, this is what it costs to buy a house. And I was talking with a client the other day who said, the buyers have really short memory. Nobody talks about 3% mortgages. They're shopping at 7. And that's what they're doing. And so the rapid change is really what people are responding to. And so then you have the risk both sides, right? The downside risk and the upside risk. Like if mortgage rates drop, what you'll see is a spur of demand and inventory will drop.
But how much of that is maybe pulled forward, right? So if home buyers are of the mindset that rates are going to keep rising, what do? They probably try to lock in and buy as quickly as they can, right? So I'm assuming there's an element of that too, in terms of the reacceleration. If you expect higher rates, right, then you start borrowing now before you get locked into the higher rate.
Yes. So you could see, absolutely, we can see the pull forward in the first half of last year. Everybody knew that rates were rising. Everybody knew that if you wanted to sell your house in 2022, you needed to get it done in the first half. Yeah, buyers knew that rates were rising, like they needed to get it done. And so we literally, the 4th of July, like the first week of July, boom, like new inventory dropped by whatever it was, 10% in a week. And like it just ratcheted down. And so by the end of the year, like you could see that pull forward dramatic. So what does that mean for right now? I don't know that there are any consumers who are like expecting, a huge spike in rates from here. Like they're trying to get it done from here. I do know that there is a certain logic that buyers are using right now, which is, look, I'm buying a house. I'm buying it at 7%. I'm buying a house I can afford, a payment I can afford. Maybe it's more than I wanted to spend per month, but I can afford it. But if rates do fall, this house only gets cheaper from here. And I think there's a lot of that logic that's happening right now. but I don't see right now a pull forward in demand. I do see a delay in demand. I think there's lots of buyers who are like, we have an affordability problem. The difference between rates of 3% and 7% is a big deal. And so there's a lot of folks who are like, oh, wait till it gets cheaper again. Yeah. And so I think we probably have the other side of that, is the delay is more, the delayed buyers is more opportunity, more likely than the pull forward of demand, like any extra demand happening now. There's none of that I don't see right now. Yeah, I think we don't do a formal, as Altos research, we don't do a formal, analysis on affordability or like an index on affordability, that kind of thing. But what I can tell you is that I think that, we've had surprisingly strong employment numbers. We have rising incomes now, and those are how the long-term affordability gets back into shape, and I would, we can look at the long-term price appreciation curve. And if you look at it with one window with like a 2015 start point, it looks like the pandemic was an adjustment out of whack too high, and that you would expect a reversion to mean down. If you do an earlier time frame, then all of a sudden the pandemic is basically finally recovering the reversion to mean the other way from the great financial crisis in terms of the long-term pricing curve. And so then over time, we grow into affordability with growing salaries and that kind of thing. I think specifically to the federal government and wage growth over, greater than inflation, for example, is probably marginal impact, like not a dramatic impact on housing. It's one of the things that helps keep housing demand up. And so, but it's a marginal one in my view, rather than like a real dramatic impact. Like there's a set of signals that, that we have that the reason that, in retrospect, we had more buyers and sellers this year. And that's like yet another one that fits in that bucket.
Talk about things that might be at the margin game changers. I'm a big fan of chaos theory when it comes to investing markets, butterfly effects, things like that. Any thoughts on how student loan repayments might impact housing dynamics at all?
Yeah, so a little bit. I think, the people talk about student loans as as like this big wave coming, and maybe it is. I don't study that student loans specifically. I do know that people who bought houses during the last handful of years, when the payments have been held off, you still qualify for your mortgage, excuse me, with the payment built in, right? So you're getting approved for a mortgage, and then suddenly you're not going to be able to make your mortgage payment because your student loan kicks in, right? Those approvals are already in place for the people who bought. So I don't worry about a bunch of 32-year-olds selling their houses because they have student loan payments ticking in particularly much. So it doesn't worry me. But it does impact on the affordability side. And so you could imagine we have one of the reasons that the housing market has been so strong through the last bunch of years and into 2024, is the demographic tailwind that we've had, because, we have the biggest cohort of people, the millennials, are in their home buying, the peak earning and home buying years, and they are ready to move into homes. And so they are buying homes. And so that puts a damper on affordability for that range. And so it pulls out some of the, maybe it counteracts the amount of the wage increases at the federal government level. It's that level of thing. It's not a signal to me of a crash, because all the buyers already qualified for their existing mortgage, with including their payments of student loans, which they haven't been paying. So that just means they've been building more equity, they've been building more savings. They're like the homeowners and people, and they're already locked in to their ultra low rate for 30 years. So like all of those seem very positive.
I see a few people want to ask questions. Just those that have requested, check your DMs and let's just coordinate before I bring you up. In terms of any kind of historical parallels, is there a higher degree of homogeneity? In other words, things kind of moving together when it comes to housing, independent of zip code, as opposed to other cycles, right? Is there less dispersion relative to history across the country?
During the pandemic, I would have said I did say that there's less dispersion. Like people were buying at all price points in all geographies. Like that boom was everywhere. And it was everywhere because it was such a good deal to be buying a house at a 2% mortgage rate at 3%. Like that boom was all price points, all geographies. Then last year, the slowdown impacted geographies very differently. And it was surprising. And had I been slightly more sensitive, I would have really been able to call this out. But like I mentioned early, the slowdown happened most dramatically in the Western U.S. markets, Boise, Austin, Phoenix, Salt Lake. Like you could see the change happen, and you could change it. You can measure quote slowdown with one of our stats that we track. We're tracking every home for sale in the country every week, and then one of the leading indicators is the percentage of homes on the market that take a price cut. And in normal times, air quotes normal, about a third take a price cut. Sometimes that's intentional. Sometimes it's accidental. Sometimes it's a seller, is wacky, whatever the thing is, but about a third take a price cut. That's normal. So then when the market is hotter, there's some people that price high and then they get the offers. They don't have to do a price cut. So all of a sudden the 28%, 25% of the homes take a price cut. So normal 35 and now 25% take a price cut. Then at the peak of the pandemic, the buying frenzy, it's like nationally, 15% of homes, only 15% of homes take a price cut. A third think they're overpriced, but only 15% take a price cut because we're getting multiple offers, we're getting bidding wars, we're getting immediate sales, all of these things. People were buying anything in sight. And so you could really see how hot it was. In places like, Salt Lake City in the February, March of 21 and 22 were at 8% with price reductions because people were gobbling up everything. Then, rates started rising. It really broke off as end of February last year. You could start to see price reductions ticking up faster than the year prior and coming out of the record low. And so then by the fall, some of these markets went from 8% with price reductions to 60% with price reductions. That was a dramatic shift. And anybody who was in Austin last year was like, oh my God, price reductions everywhere. You could really see it. And so that happened. And then at the same time, inventory rose in those markets, right? The sellers had pulled forward and those that didn't get their deal done by June, now it sat on the market. There was no buyers. And so inventory rose and then rate jumped in September. Inventory rose again. And so by October, you could see another peak in price reductions and in inventory climbing. And so those were the Western U.S. markets. And then meanwhile, though, and this is one of the places where I'd hoped I'd been more sensitive, was that you look around and Chicago and New Jersey and, the Northeast markets, those inventories didn't climb at all. So demand definitely slowed, but inventory didn't climb. And, we didn't have those markets were our outbound migration markets, and it was inbound migration markets to the, South and West. And the migration slowed way down. And so the destination of those markets slowed way down. But the origin markets didn't slow. They slowed, but, inventory didn't build. So all of a sudden we had a divergent. We had a bifurcated experience at the beginning of the year. But what that also would tell me is that, wow, we are not in a broadly rising inventory environment for the year. Like last year in October, I should have been able to see that because you could look at half of the country is not rising in inventory. Only the destination migration markets. So that's the long answer to your question, is that right now we could we went from during the pandemic, a tightly correlated market to now to have local markets are behaving differently based a lot, I think, on the migration patterns, and so therefore affordability and choosing to not go buy. You also had, while you didn't have any investors selling in the last year to speak of, you did have dramatic slowdown. You had slowdown at the Wall Street money and buying, and you had slowdown at the individual level of buying. And the mid-tier of investors, the ones who own, 100 homes or, in that range, those folks kept operating their business and were buying homes during the year and didn't slow down as much. But you could see the demand slow in those markets. And those investors, they're all buying in the same markets. Like they're all buying in, the Smile state, the Southwest, Southeast markets. And so you could see them, like they were reacting differently than say at the Central and the Northeast. Yeah. So we're tracking at Altos. We track, all single family, all the condos, townhomes like that. We also track rentals, but we don't track multifamily development, right? So we're not, the fact that there are record levels of apartments in construction right now is not in our data set. But new construction is finally back to the long-term, like replacement level. One of the reasons that we have low inventory now is because we underbuilt for a decade. And, if you think about that, so that the current levels of homes that are in construction right now is higher than it has been, but it's not particularly worrisome. In fact, it's like a relief, right? We're finally getting some inventory there. We could see that there is a challenge in checking some of those numbers fall in that, what's in construction? Well, like that new home in, because some of that's just like lot that's, got a power line to it kind of thing. And it's not actually a house you can buy. So what we do at Altos is if the house is a new construction and it's ready to move in, we include it in the active inventory, in our active inventory numbers. But if there's a house that's like, for sale and it's just a rendering of a house and it's not actually a house yet, we actually take those out of our active inventory numbers. We're talking about houses that you can buy right now. And so we can see there are times, and I expected this to happen more as we came out of the supply chain shocks, that we would see some new home inventory. It didn't really happen, but we will track. So we want to focus on, like, if I walk into the market now, what houses can I buy? And so that's what the Altos numbers represent. So then you go like, what could be there? And like I said, we have had, home builders had a great year because they had some of that pandemic inventory that was starting to get loose that they could sell, and they had better control on mortgage rates. So it was a better deal to buy a new home, and the selection of existing homes was super tight. So it was a banner year for home builders. And so there's nothing in the home builder, the new construction data that looks like there's a ton of stuff coming. I don't like financing of apartment buildings. Like I live in San Francisco, and there's a ton of shakeout to still happen with, the big apartment building owners who don't have 30-year fixed mortgages. There's like a lot of that to go. There's, in the commercial stuff too, there's still a lot of shakeout there too. And those you can imagine if there's big enough crisis on that side that, resale housing market also gets hit, and there are reverberations through there that aren't in the data yet. And I don't have an ability to predict, but you can imagine that they could happen. No, but here's the thing. It's funny because, as Logan said, we actually have the same conclusion. We get to that conclusion differently. But so the conventional wisdom is that we have low inventory this year because rates went up and people are locked into their homes. And I'm locked in forever and I can't sell. And the way I look at it is that data is actually, so that implies that I'm locked in. So therefore, when will we get inventory? We would get inventory when rates fall. That's the conventional wisdom. If rates would finally fall again, then we'd get some more inventory. But the data is actually the opposite of that. And this is what I call the Altos rule, which is higher rates equals more inventory. Lower rates equals less inventory. And it works like if you walk through the data, we had lower inventory every year for the last decade, pretty much every year for the last decade. Inventory fall. You look at the January lows, lower each year, with the exception of 2018 to 2019. And in 2018, we had rising rates. So rising rates led to rising inventory in 2018 to 2019. Then 2020, we had dramatically falling rates. We had dramatically falling inventory. 22, we had spiking rates and spiking inventory. Then in the last year, post November, we had slightly falling rates and we had slightly falling inventory. And right now we are in a point where we are in, again, rising rates late in the summer, and we can see slight signals of inventory climbing, or at least not cresting for the fall. So the Altos rule is, when you get more inventory is higher rates equals higher inventory, lower rates is lower inventory, and it's holding costs is the reason. If it costs me more to hold the real estate, I hold less and I resell it more. If its rates are lower, it costs me less to hold real estate, so I hold more and I resell less. So falling rates will spur demand, but not necessarily as much supply. So therefore, and Logan points out, I think, that, lockdown means I can't sell. And Logan, I think, objects to the hypothesis that I can't. I will sell. I do. I move. Things happen, so we get to the point where that ultimately the conclusion is, what gets us to more inventory? Higher mortgage rate. What gets us to lower inventory? Lower mortgage. So I think one of the ways to look at it is every policy, every law, every tax policy, essentially in the U.S. has been focused on the homeowner, on protecting the money you have, on protecting your home, on keeping you in the home. Every policy. And, in places like California, it's even better because your property taxes never go up. And therefore in California, we have had chronic shortage of inventory since Prop 13 kicked in 5 years ago, because it's like a really great deal to never sell your home. And so I think it's a 50-year policy. Again, Michael, to your topic name here, it's like, I don't blame Airbnb. It's a 50-year policy of we want Americans to own homes. We want them to make the bulk of their investments in their home. We want to protect that at all costs. And I think we are seeing the negative side of that too. Like I said, I live in California, and, one of the big challenges of the state is that because your property taxes never go up, you never sell your home, there's chronic shortage of inventory. Compare it to Texas, similar size Texas town, it's probably 20% of inventory per capita. In California versus Texas, it's dramatically fewer. And Texas has a more robust housing market. Texas has a better housing market than California because Texas has high property tax and California has ultra low property taxes. The Texans hate it when I point that out, but it's true. It's the Texas housing market is better because the Texas property, the holding costs are higher. So you've got to resell, and there's more resale. Therefore, the market clearing price is lower, and therefore it's more affordable. It is significantly better because Texas property taxes are higher. I think so. There's two competing challenges here. So in general, one of the reasons I have not been I'm not a ultra bear on housing. Even though you can see home prices were not going to climb, I wasn't in a camp that was expecting home price crash. And one of the reasons is because every law we have in the country is to keep people in their homes and to keep those prices up. And everything we have the mortgage market, all of it's designed, tax treatment, all of the things. And that seems unlikely to change. The people who vote are the people who already own their home. So that seems unlikely to change. Even though the California Prop 13 is objectively the worst tax law in the history of tax laws, there's no way to repeal it, right? Because the people who vote are the ones who are getting paid every day. And so that says to me that we will continue the path of unaffordability to new home buyers. There are starting to be some policy level things and, like local level people who are like, we need to be able to figure out housing affordability. So things like density policies are starting to kick in. I haven't seen the 1% tax on investors, but in some ways it makes sense. I think one of the things I could understand that as a policy tool that some areas would start experimenting with that. I think it is we have this misconception that the big Wall Street money is investing in buying all the homes in the country, which is not true. The investors, like I've said on this call earlier, is that 94% of the real estate investors are like individuals, one or two homes. And, so if that's who you want to tax in the country, like that would be the recipient of the tax. But that is why, but I think to your point, there is some local jurisdictions who are starting to do zoning changes, tax changes, things like that with the service of greater density and affordability is starting to recognize that we are over the curve. And so there is indeed some encouraging green shoots in policy.
I think that's a good place to wrap this conversation up. Mike, for those who want to track more of your thoughts and get access to some of your analysis, where would you point to?
So you can follow me on Twitter, Mike Simonsen on Twitter. Every Monday I do the Altos research data. I do a video on YouTube. It's about 10, 12 minutes long. And I do a thread on Twitter so that you can track every week what's actually happening. And if you have a hypothesis about the direction of housing, you think it's going to crash, you want to know, you want to confirm your hypothesis, follow that each week and you can actually check your data against your hypothesis every given week. AltosResearch.com. If you need to know and you need to help buyers and sellers or people investors understand where the housing market is heading right now, you can get Altos data or Altos reports at Altos Research. And the YouTube channel is Altos Research. So all of those places are great. And we talk housing all day long.
Appreciate everybody joining and hopefully I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Michael,
cheers, everybody.
Nice to be here.